Well, hey, everybody, welcome to episode 37 of Lean Whiskey. I'm Mark Graban. I'm back. I didn't get permanently replaced last time by...
Nope, by Chris Cosman, who was a guest in the last episode. I'm Jamie Flinchbaugh. Glad to have you back, Mark. It was a fun little detour, but glad to be back here with you.
Yeah, well, I'm glad you could do it. I've had non-Jamie collaborators on episodes, so fair enough. I wasn't really sore about that, but I'm glad you could do it. And we're going to share kind of a Christmassy cocktail. We're going to talk about a place that serves a lot of Christmassy or holiday-ish beverages, or they've become associated with the holidays. That is Starbucks. But I thought first we could just cheers and just say the name of your drink. Then we'll come back in a second to talk about some of the detail.
Yeah. So I'm drinking a hot buttered bourbon,
and I am drinking a Bourbon Flip. And like a bartender, it is very, very, very full. I'm surprised I didn't spill on the way in here. Well, cheers.
Cheers.
Happy holidays to everybody. So you watched the World Cup final earlier today. How was that?
Yeah, it was probably the best World Cup final ever. Absolute classic, absolute thriller. And really enjoyed sitting down to watch it. It was a long, 3 weeks of the World Cup, or 4 weeks, but as it always is, and I definitely preferred in the summer as it's supposed to be. Mm-hmm. But it was one heck of a tournament and a fantastic final.
You might be surprised. Actually, I turned it on in the second half extra time. Am I I'm saying that correctly, right?
Yeah.
Extra time, then into overtime, right?
Yeah, well, there's extra time. Extra time is the extra 30 minutes they add after the 90. Yeah.
So stoppage time.
Stoppage time is added to the end of sort of the regular playing time. So you'll have 90 minutes plus 5, but then you'll sort of start at the 91st minute in extra time. So it's really hard. You got to do some math to figure out how much total playing time has gone on. So
yeah. And then if there's a goal scored in stoppage time, that would be listed as being like 93 minutes in. But then if there was a goal 3 minutes into the extra period, that's also 93 minutes?
No, it's 90 plus 3 would be if it was in stoppage time. And then it'd be 93rd if it was in extra time.
All right.
So
I'm demonstrating how little I know about.
Well, it's just how you keep score. I don't know how to keep a box score in a baseball game anymore. I used to, but when I was a kid. But those are just minor details. In the end, one team scores more than the other, and that's who wins. So even if it takes penalty kick shootout.
Yeah, that was exciting. They were debating if that one goal, if they're offside, and they weren't explaining it like to a newbie like me. They had like the graphic, and I'm still trying to get the hang of. I thought, like, is that guy too far ahead? And this is the least technical way of describing it. But
yeah, and he wasn't. I think there was 0 controversial calls. I think it was a very well refereed match. But yeah, they kind of struggle with do they announce the game for the beginner, or do they announce the game for the regular fan? And it's not an easy trick. And then on top of that, there's a single video feed for the world. So you can't decide as a television station to replay a particular play yourself. You get a single feed and then you just narrate on top of it. So you're very limited by what you can and can't do on a tournament like this, just because there's too many televisions in the world trying to get the feed. So
well, I bet that balance is tough to strike. It's like giving a talk at a conference or teaching a class where you might have lean newbies in the room and people who are very experienced.
Yeah, and of course, if you're in the room, you can react to the questions and the comments, and on television, you can react to people's Twitter feeds and their Reddit comments. And I have to say, because I've been sitting around a bit, spent a little time on Reddit looking at the World Cup thread, and it's almost sad how little people know about the rules, but want to comment on it, which is, it's okay if you don't know the rules, but then don't comment on it. But at least not with extreme indignation. But even the announcers have been caught out not really knowing the rules, which is a little bit of a pet peeve for mine, because you're a professional calling a sport. Like, sit down, read the rules, have someone coach you, get certified. It's really not that hard. Do the steps you need to be a professional.
Well, it seems like there'd be an opportunity. Let's say the Fox feed could be for the soccer diehards, and then some of the games are also on FS1, or you've got the Fox Sports app. It seems like if they really wanted to, they could do an audio feed that's more for the beginners.
Well, and they do it the other way, is that the Men in Blazers podcast group, who are kind of famous, soccer podcasters, they do a Twitch feed. Not that I watched, but they do a Twitch feed live. So they're doing a watch party. So different commentary, definitely not for the beginner, but I think you get to, if you want to listen to that, you can listen to a very different chatter. I think it's kind of like how the Manning brothers do Monday Night Football or something like that. So.
Or the college football playoff has all kinds of alternative feeds with different audio, and they do run different video for some of those feeds. But if you want to hear 3 or 4 coaches just talking about the game as it's happening, roundtable, you can do that. Or you got options. There's the one feed that has nothing but the stadium sound, which is kind of refreshing sometimes.
It is. I do like it when, at least in soccer, when an announcer, either the audio goes out for a little while, sometimes technical difficulties, or they just decide to let you listen for a little while, and that's fun too. So that is a nice approach.
Yeah. Well, the most fun I had this week was on Wednesday. I'll share a little bit about it, and we could do a deeper dive, maybe the first episode we do in 2023. But on Wednesday, Ted Stiles was in town, of Stiles Associates, lean recruiting firm, and someone who's been learning and involved in the lean community a long time. He was in Cincinnati, so we drove down. We did the 9 a.m. Toyota Georgetown plant tour, which I'd never been to that facility. The tram tour, they drive you through it, and that's not the best. That's not really going to Gemba, but it's something, and enjoyed that. And that tour, the narrator there, it's pretty much for like lean beginners. They're trying to explain like first introduction to terms, and the tour guide, and he was admittedly new and he's still being trained, but he was reading a script, and instead of saying tact time, it must have been in all capitals, because he spelled it out TAKT time. Like, well, he'll get there. Hopefully someone's going to coach him up. And so that was fun. And then we went down to Frankfurt and spent some time with David Meyer at Glens Creek Distilling. So that was really that was the most lean whiskey day I've maybe ever had.
Yeah, no, that's a great combination of events. Of course, David Meyer used to work at the site, and now gets to practice his lean trade, making an increasing diversity of different labels under Glens Creek. He continues to invent new stuff. He has probably seems like he has more different expressions, I guess we call them, right? Different expressions under his label than some of the majors do. It's pretty impressive, his experimentation and exploration that he pursues. So lots of good lean whiskey stuff for you, and that certainly could be some future fodder for a whole other topic of what visiting sites is like. So because there's a lot of lean talk with David. We went through elements of his distillery process, because Ted hadn't been there before either, and I've been there, and every time I'm there, he learns some things. And David's got the ability to do small batches, or everything is a single barrel release for him. One little detail I learned from him, like a terminology thing, that legally a distillery can sell you something that says single barrel on the bottle, and single barrel has no legally defined term. It might not literally be a single barrel. It could be a marrying of, David was saying, not naming names, but like, oh yeah, this one distillery says to them a single barrel is like marrying together 25
different barrels. Like that sounds like what you might call small batch, which also has no legal definition.
Right. Well, maybe they should get on that and start to find those things. That's a lot of terms get thrown around, from organic to, that don't have legal definitions, but they get used as marketing terms. So unless there's a barrel number on it, which I assume, at least if they put a barrel number on it, hopefully it's actually a single barrel.
Right. Yeah, and David does.
It might not be.
Garrison Brothers does that when they do a single barrel release as well.
Right. Yep. And a lot too. So might be something to look out for. So that sounds like a lot of fun. And these are all events leading into the holidays. I don't know if this was really meant to be a Merry Christmas episode, but it turns into one. And you've got quite the festive shirt on.
So it's kind of like an ugly sweater. I'll describe it for those who are just listening to the podcast. Those on YouTube will be able to see it. So it looks like an ugly Christmas sweater. Well, kind of step back. It says, "I'm full of holiday spirit. It's called bourbon."
Well, that's a pretty good holiday spirit to be filled with. So I don't know about wrapping the lights around the glass. That might be a tricky.
No.
Tricky concoction, if you would, but
yeah. And I'm only 2 sips into holiday cheer, so the T-shirt's not totally accurate. I am not full of bourbon, but I think I'm full of holiday cheer.
Well, that's good. That's good. I'm getting there. I'm usually all about it, but getting there a little slowly this year. So I'm definitely not full of holiday spirit in the bourbon sense either. And this is but might as well get into our whiskey selection. We did decide on the theme of some holiday cocktails that felt like they fit with the holiday spirit. So we each made something a bit different, which at least visually, absolutely fits the bill of, I think, a holiday cocktail sipper.
Yeah. So tell us about yours first.
So mine is a hot buttered bourbon, which is obviously a take on the hot buttered rum. Mm-hmm. Don't even know if I have rum because I really don't drink that. And I tried to find a single recipe on this, and it just doesn't seem to exist. So I'll find one that I'll include in the notes. But it starts with hot water. I found an interesting tip, which was really preheat the glass. Make sure I fill it up with hot water, just let it sit. Get the temperature, and then it's by the time you're putting the hot water in to make the drink, you're in good shape. You put in some hot water. You actually buy this hot buttered rum mix, which is sugary. It's a refrigerated, it's syrupy, sugary concoction of bad stuff. So I forget all what's in it, but it's certainly not good for you, but you mix in, it's very consistent to putting in slightly crystallized honey into hot water. It just takes a little while to dissolve. Bitters are optional. Put in some bourbon. I used mellow corn. It's a cheaper, straightforward, very simple whiskey. You're not going to get a whole lot of the nuance of the whiskey coming through in this, just because of the mix and everything else. And then, at least what I do and what I found was you top it off with heavy whipped cream. Mm-hmm. So I whipped up some heavy whipping cream, put a little layer on top of that, and then topped it with nutmeg. And it's it's a sipper. It's a nice warm, bourbony, but not super cocktail or spirit forward drink. This only has 1.5 ounces of bourbon in it, and it still comes through, but it doesn't overwhelm you like some cocktails do.
Yeah, and the mellow corn is 90% corn recipe, so it's that's a really high percentage corn, and bottled in bond. The bourbon I used in my cocktails also a bottled in bond, so 100 proof or 50%. ABV. And I just pulled up here because I don't think I've made hot buttered rum, but it says if you didn't have the mix, you could beat brown sugar, butter, honey, cinnamon, nutmeg, cloves, and salt in a bowl until blended and smooth.
Yeah, I wasn't going to do that.
Right.
And so, I think for the real connoisseur of cocktail making that they want to make a bunch of these, probably worth it to make your own. But I was not going to do that. You can buy a mix on Amazon for not a whole lot.
Okay, not scolding you. Just I was curious of what.
It's a whole bunch of stuff in there, which is what scared me off from making it in the first place.
Yeah. Well, cool. So, I mean, what's the verdict then? I mean, is it?
I love it. I enjoy it a lot. It's I've made a couple of them. I made some at Thanksgiving, and that's kind of my first experimented with it, and I enjoy it. I don't know if I'd do 2 in a row. Certainly wouldn't do 3, but I think it's a perfect warming cocktail.
Good.
That's I think definitely suits the spirit of the season.
Okay. Well, I think I may try that when back home in Texas for Christmas and New Year. So I am drinking. I'll hold it up again. I'd say a cold cocktail, which might sound counterintuitive for being December. Is called again a Bourbon Flip. It's listed oftentimes as being a Christmas drink, and it's sort of a lighter version of an eggnog. So it's really more in that category of, because of the spice on top, a little bit of pumpkin pie spice on top, and the egg. It's noggy, and if you've had eggnog before, I'm not a huge eggnog fan. It would make you think of Christmas, though. I don't think you would want to sip on one of these on a hot summer day.
No, and there aren't that many warm cocktails, so I think it's fine that it's cold. And it definitely anything that falls into that category of sort of anything close to eggnog, I think you're automatically in a holiday spirit. So, and it like a lot of cocktails, I think the holidays, you take a little more time. You're not just whipping up a cocktail to sit down for the evening. You're kind of enjoying it a little more. A few more ingredients are okay, and this definitely. I don't know if it's more ingredients, but just from a process standpoint, there's a lot to it.
You could probably, I'm sure you could make a batch of hot buttered rum, pour it into mugs, top with whipped cream. The Bourbon Flip, I'll tell you about the ingredients and the process. This is probably more of a one at a time kind of drink. So I started off with 2 ounces of bourbon, and I used a Benchmark bonded bourbon. This is one I did not know about until fairly recently. It was recommended to me, and just to dig into that a little bit. On the label it says McAfee Brothers Benchmark. I'm like, well, who the hell is that? And then on the side, it's distilled, aged, and bottled by Buffalo Trace Distillery, Frankfort, Kentucky. This is, my understanding of it is that this is Buffalo Trace aged 1 year less.
Okay.
Same mash bill, same juice. Buffalo Trace in all the places is outrageously hard to find. It's about $25 a bottle at regular retail price. Benchmark, the bonded was, I think, 18 or 19. They've got a little bit cheaper one. They do a Benchmark single barrel. They do a number of options. So got the whiskey bar at the Cincinnati airport kind of recommended it. And so if you're looking for Buffalo Trace and you can't find it, go grab Benchmark.
Yeah, I've heard good things about it. I've never had it. I think the hype and the scavenging for the Buffalo Trace products is ridiculous.
Yeah.
Buffalo Trace is worth $25. Is it worth standing in a 100-person line for? No.
But when I lived in LA and you could go to Ralph's or CVS and they had it on the shelf and you could buy it with your discount card for $21.99. Yeah. Absolutely. Especially for cocktails.
Yeah, it's a good whiskey. I don't understand standing in line for it. I don't understand it being stripped off the shelf and people in stores needing to say 1 bottle per customer.
Yeah.
I just don't. I don't understand the hype, but hype has that irrational aspect to it. So it's just sort of how somebody showed me a video. They were actually at Buffalo Trace, just trying to, and they on their website they'll show you what's in stock if you want to go, and almost nothing is.
Yeah.
And he got there early in the morning, and there was a line out the door before they opened just to buy what was probably the only thing in stock was some Buffalo Trace, and just
and they limit how often you can go back. I was talking to some neighbors here last night. One of them actually got a bottle of Blanton's down there at the distillery for $63, which is what the retail price is supposed to be. And you cannot find it anywhere really for that price. I've seen it for double that, triple that. I'm like, well, no, it's good, but I'm not going to overpay, and I'm not going to go stand in line. Now, you and I stood in line for hours to get barbecue in Texas, so we're not opposed to waiting in line.
But. Yes, we have done that, but when there's plenty of other options on the shelf, right, that are perfectly good, like the benchmark, then why bother? So I think that's a fair choice. So what do you think of the Bourbon Flip so far?
Yeah, well, so let me tell you the rest of the ingredients in the process, right? So take a metal shaker, 2 ounces of the bourbon, 1 whole egg. So there's some eggnog recipes, traditional eggnog recipes, raw egg. You got to be well comfortable with that, I guess. 1 ounce of simple syrup. Now, I actually used a simple syrup that I make at home using allulose, which we've talked about before. It's an artificial sweetener that's it's naturally occurring. It's more expensive than sugar, but it's very similar to sugar. So I'm cutting the calories a little bit using that. And then you dry shake it. So have you ever made a cocktail that requires dry shaking?
I have not.
So to help foam the egg, right? So you can see, it's a very opaque drink. It's got that nice foam on top. Dry shaking is when you shake without ice.
Okay.
So you kind of break down the egg, about 30 seconds and froth it up a little bit, then add ice and do your traditional, okay, now we make it cold shake. And then, a pinch of, I didn't have nutmeg, but pumpkin pie spice, I think, has nutmeg in it, and that's fine. So I like it. I wouldn't want a second one.
Okay.
It's just, it's heavy. Not as bad as a super thick eggnog. So I think especially with the artificial sweetener, I'll call it diet eggnog, which maybe doesn't sound appealing, but it's good.
Yeah, and I'm not a crazy fan of egg drinks, but whiskey sour, I don't mind one, but I probably rarely want a second one after I've had one. So that's fair. Make one, enjoy it. It changes it up, mixes it up, and then move on to something else.
Now, I did experiment with this about, I don't know, one or 2 weeks ago. Part of me said I should have done it for the first time here for doing the episode, but no. It was good enough that I would make it again. I'm just not going to have a second one today. That's for sure.
Yeah, that's fair.
Yeah. All right. Well, cheers, and we'll hold that up again.
Yep.
Once more. Hey, cheers.
Cheers.
And all right, so we'll move into, we're going to do an in the news segment, not related to whiskey, but as I mentioned up front, Starbucks, you could call them a purveyor of coffee, or speaking of sugar, you could call them a purveyor of sugary milk and ice that maybe has coffee in it, right?
Yeah, I do wonder how many more grams of sugar they go through than grams of coffee if they measured it by weight. That would be an interesting stat that I doubt they share, but certainly does seem like it's more sugar at this point.
Well, I mean, the nutritional information for the drinks is online, so you could probably see how many grams, and you could probably guess how many grams. You're the espresso making guy.
Yeah, you could probably surmise how many grams per shot, and so yeah, you could probably do some math based on how many drinks overall that they make in a year. So I'm not going to go do that math, but plenty of sugar going through that place. That we can say for sure.
But the article that we're talking about was actually an article from August, so I'd be curious how much progress they've been making since then. But here's the headline, and we'll post a link. It'll be a free article. I was able to get the gift article link, so if you're not a Wall Street Journal subscriber, you could go and read the article. But the headline is, Starbucks is rethinking almost everything, including how to make frappuccinos. Subheadline reads, Changing tastes and frazzled workers prompt CEO Howard Schultz to press for a reset, quote, "We will design new stores from scratch," end of quote. So what was your first reaction to that?
There's a lot to unpack there. I think the first thing I want to react to should say returning CEO Howard Schultz.
Right.
You kind of wonder, is succession planning not working there, or what else is going wrong, or is he just that brilliant that he has to keep returning?
He came back in March 2022.
Right.
And it's the second time doing that, right?
Second time coming back. Yeah. So it's his third stint, essentially. And of course, he's also not really the founder, but that's a whole other thing. But I think the whole rethink, we talk about continuous improvement, should theoretically mean you never have to rethink everything, because you're always rethinking everything. But sometimes it's you have to go bigger. You have to look deeper. You have to tear the house down to the studs, right? Kind of improvement. And essentially that's what he's kind of saying and asking for is let's tear Starbucks down to the studs and rethink it. And that of course is a huge prospect, but I'll say bold in the sense that you see other companies that have survived sort of shockwave after shockwave. Netflix is an example where they tore their company down to the studs to go from mailing DVDs to streaming, as an example. And so every once in a while there's a change, whether it's a change forced upon you externally, or a change of outrunning your own pathway, where you gotta take a step back and rethink the whole thing. And that seems like to be where they are.
Yeah, I mean, in manufacturing terms, it would be the opportunity, or even in healthcare, to build a greenfield site. I think of the progression. Toyota came into the U.S. with General Motors and NUMMI. That was an old legacy factory that probably dated back to the 50s.
Yeah, I think so.
You can only do so much within the confines of the layout. And then Toyota built the plant in Kentucky and other plants. And then when they built the plant in San Antonio, that was a chance to yet again rethink as much as you could rethink. I saw construction when I was in Georgetown. They are putting in some assembly lines, it said, for future EV production. That's an opportunity. You can't rethink the whole building, but you can rethink elements of how you do assembly, not just because it's electric, but a new chance to try again. So, I'd be curious if Starbucks will do like McDonald's, will tear down a store and rebuild on the same site.
I think they definitely will. I mean, they have the capital, they have the cash flow. At some point, I don't know. I'm not going to go deep in their financials, but I think for certain, if nothing else, there's aesthetic that they always want to keep upgraded. But I would think so. And if you look at, I was on a road trip recently, so I naturally one of the few places that you can reliably pull over and get a meal at is a McDonald's, and it's very different than it used to be. It's really set up for drive-throughs and things like that, and very different aesthetic, very different functionality. And the difference though is that the number of different footprints that Starbucks has to work with is massively more complex than McDonald's. I actually used to own a property. I was part owner. I was a minority silent partner in a construction project, but owned a property that McDonald's bought, and we built a McDonald's, or they built a McDonald's on the property, and then it was sold to them. But it was it was very strict what they could work with, right? What they were willing to do and what they weren't willing to do. And Starbucks is willing to do a whole lot more, right? Just to get the number of storefronts that they've gotten to. So that'll make that more complicated, but I would imagine, probably even more necessary.
But when we get into some of the detail here, the article talks about not just the layout of the store, but some of the equipment. So I could see where if you had new, better equipment, you could put that in most or all of the stores, regardless of layout. I spent an hour this morning. There's a new location that opened maybe 6 weeks ago here on the Kentucky side of the river, it is clearly not like, it's not a freestanding purpose-built Starbucks as you sometimes see. It's in a building where it appears they are leasing space, and there was this parcel of, or part of the building. It does allow for a drive-through, which is an increasingly large part of the Starbucks business, which affects operations inside the store, of course. But it's interesting to look and to sit and watch the process and think about the store layout and say, well, I'm sure this wasn't built to whatever new standard that they're developing now.
Can't be. You'll see it in probably more pristine locations first, and they've got to get it right. They're going to just keep building whatever they have now because they still want, they still want the sports store front. They still want to build a habit with the customers going to a particular store.
Yeah.
And then, so until there's such a new design, they will just keep building the new ones. But, they've evolved so much over the years. I still remember, and I have no idea what even decade this is, but when Subway first created toasted subs and they put the toaster in the sub shop, it broke the system.
Yeah.
Right. It broke all the Subways because it changed the flow. And still not sure they ever figured it out, but it really was almost catastrophic because they inserted this one piece of equipment.
Yeah.
Wasn't that bold, but it broke the flow, it broke the layout, and made a whole lot of things more challenging. So
yeah,
and Starbucks in this case has more evolved than inserted one little thing, but there's a bunch of ways in which they've evolved. I think the two we could talk about the most is drink complexity and proliferation.
Right.
And then the shift to the percentage of drive-through customers. Mm-hmm. Those two major dynamics really changed the store in a lot of ways.
Yeah, and the addition of hot food is relatively recent in Starbucks history. So I've heard with the Starbucks,
that'd be a third big one.
With the Subway thing, that at the time Quiznos was really taking market share, toasted subs, and my understanding is that Quiznos, because I used to, like, when we would do lean classes, we would go to Quiznos. Let's go get lunch, because they bought supposedly these old Burger King broilers that are flow broilers, right? So they would start the sandwich, it would flow through the toasting machine, and I think maybe they would carry it around if you really didn't want to toast sub, and then they would finish it on the other side of the oven. My understanding is that Subway had like kind of a batch oven that wasn't in the flow, and it's an example of looking at product innovation. If it's not paired with process design, design, process design, that's an old manufacturing lesson, right? We get terms like design for assembly, design for manufacturability, right?
Yep. Yeah, and it's you have to think about what your process is going to be. I still remember back in my automotive days, I was retooling a plant just to add a convertible. We were adding a convertible and importing it. It was made in another location, another country. And the process changes that had to take place, and the process innovation that I won't go into too many details, but the ergonomic standards that existed in the country it was made in were not going to fly in the US, and we had to create some new processes to make them work. So you've got to think, you can't just invent a new product. You can't just invent a new process technology. You've got to understand how that all fits with process flow. And with Starbucks, they've had so many, and I don't want to call them innovations, so many changes.
Right.
So many changes from the sandwiches to the, just the food in general, the drive-through volume, and the drink complexity, in particular, the frozen drinks, that their process has not kept up, and it's had an impact on speed. It's had an impact on the workers in particular, it seems.
I remember reading complaints from baristas at Starbucks that when they added the warmed food option, that was more labor time, it was more labor content, and that the store wasn't being allocated or budgeted a higher level of labor. So there's a different level of, you think of what's the product, what's the process flow. And I guess part of that process design is how many people do you need to do that more complicated work? And there were many complaints that they didn't have that down to a science, or there were complaints. But I sat there observing this morning, and one time a customer, she came back up and complained her sandwich or whatever it was still frozen in the middle. And they're warming. It's not a scratch kitchen. They are warming frozen food. And I mean, I've had that defect occasionally. I'm surprised they don't have that more dialed in. I don't know how that goes wrong.
Yeah, and that's a bad defect. I mean, that really is, for a customer to get cold in the middle. That's no good at all. And I'd imagine, I know I've read some stuff, is that they all take different cook times.
Sure.
And so do you just select the wrong one when you're rushing between orders and you forget one because there's not, I've never seen a cheat sheet up. I'm not sure they punch in the item number or the item itself, and so did they just punch in and it wasn't warmed enough? And it could also be, how long does it have to sit out of the freezer? Did they run short that day and they pulled some out of the freezer?
Yeah, I don't know if
with enough room warming time, but defrosting time. So I don't know enough about that, but
I didn't get behind
what happens with complexity.
Yeah, I wasn't able to get behind the counter to see some of that detail, but there are things you can observe, and some of this will touch on why Starbucks says they're trying to redesign, not just for efficiency, but to make work easier. That would certainly be a good ideal. But there's the drive-through, and that article said about half of their business now is drive-through, and not every store has a drive-through. So I don't know if it's half of the business at stores with drive-throughs. But the one thing you could observe customer behavior is very few people came inside and went to the register and ordered with a human. I've gotten in the habit of, when I'm walking to that Starbucks, which is maybe a 5-minute walk, I'll punch in the mobile order, knowing that then about when I show up, give or take a minute. Sometimes it's ready before I get there. Sometimes I wait just a couple of minutes. It's not that I'm trying to not interact with anybody, but in a way it's easier, I guess. So I try to say hi and thank you to whoever has made the beverage or whoever's put it in that pickup area. But that's another thing they've had to change operationally with all of these mobile orders. You're not handing it to somebody across the counter. You're putting it on a counter, and that system has evolved where now you have letters of your names. It's not just a free-for-all of a bunch of beverages sitting there. That sounds like somebody's process improvement.
Yeah, I'd imagine there's I mean, I've been into a few, and I can't imagine you can't just walk in and grab a drink and walk out. Like, that's got to be the easiest thing in the world to get a free drink on.
I wonder, how much theft is there?
I don't know. I'd imagine not that much. You're stealing a Starbucks, right? So it's not exactly the high risk reward ratio there, but so I go to Starbucks very little. I've probably been 5 times in the last 5 years. Typically it'd be like at an airport or something, and that's the last option I have, or I've got to wait somewhere. It's just not a drink I enjoy that much. They don't make the best straight espresso, and that's kind of my preferred drink. Or even when I go to, I'll call it a real coffee shop, I'll ask, do you make a Starbucks macchiato or real macchiato? Because Starbucks has messed up the term. It's not actually a macchiato, but we make a real macchiato, which is one of my favorite drinks, is a real macchiato, but it's not a Starbucks one. So I don't even have the app. If I go, I've got to go to the counter and place an order. And I almost feel bad doing it because I feel like I'm breaking up their system at that point.
Yeah, it comes back to that labor allocation of how do they plan and forecast and allocate for how many people need to be working there at different times of day, different times of the week. That's got to be a big challenge, an evolving challenge.
An evolving challenge, but between data and then I think the fact that so many people are going through a drive-through, it's not a spontaneous thing, right? It's not a, hey, yeah, let's go out for Starbucks as a treat. It's like, no, I get my Starbucks on my way to work.
Yeah.
And there's, I don't know what the numbers are anymore, but I know in the past there's been a significant percentage are once a day or even twice a day Starbucks visitors.
Mm-hmm.
And that's a big chunk of the revenue, which means it's a steady state, which means it's easier to, if you have that everyday usage, it's kind of like planning traffic. It's like every day is mostly the same with a few exceptions. And so I think most of their volume probably falls into that category. And they even say in the article, they talk about some of their regulars who they know when they're walking in what they've ordered and whether they're going to get them on time or not, based on some of the challenges they're facing along the way.
Yeah. So the article here again from August kind of follows up a 2009 article that I had blogged about back in the day, and I'll share a link to that article as well. Reading this article, you might think, well, they're talking about improving the process, rearranging things, reducing wasted motion, improving ergonomics, and so well, didn't they already quote unquote implement lean more than a decade ago? We'll put links in the show notes as well. Because the Wall Street Journal had written about it. John Shook wrote about it on the LEI blog in 2009. Like, this article doesn't mention the word lean or Toyota,
right?
But go back to 2009. John Shook wrote this article kind of defending that. This isn't just about efficiency. It's not turning workers into robots, because that was one of the concerns or complaints in 2009. But it was really, as Shook was explaining, really about teaching scientific problem solving to the frontline employees. But then, kind of, to me, begs the question that maybe comes up through the work happening now. But it's one thing to teach to the frontline employees, but what if their district managers and executives in Starbucks don't understand lean? Like, is it fair to say, like, well, you've all been trained, so don't complain about anything. You're empowered to fix it. And like, well, I don't think that's always fair.
No, it's not. And I think they went on a journey working within the parameters that they could, right? And so, I don't know what they've done since, but those workers had parameters that they could work in. They had the equipment that they had the footprint that they had, and they practiced continuous improvement. Mm-hmm. They worked on standardization, which was a big part of what they were trying to do, which obviously, if you're trying to deliver consistency across a network that big, is pretty important. How do you train people, all of those things. But at some point, they can just run afoul of what can I improve and what can't I improve. Right. Like, I'd like this to be over there. Well, that won't fit without us buying the building next door. Right. That won't fit without us tearing the store apart. That won't fit without us inventing new technology. Yeah. And so, in certain environments, if you're, I know Boeing was really big on this, of having the skunk works, right, in their factories. You could go to a little area and work with a couple, master machinists and fabricators and make up tooling. Well, in a store of 10 people, you don't have a fabricator. You certainly can't invent a new oven or invent a new blender or start tearing down the walls. So you still have to work within the parameters that you're fixed with. And I think the article today really is just making clear that's sort of run its course. I don't want to say it's run its course like they're out of ideas, just that there's enough areas in which they need to improve that the workers can't do on their own.
Well, so what I saw observing in the store today were many of the problems that were supposedly being addressed back in 2009. I saw people bending down to get milk out of a fridge and putting it back into the fridge. There's an equipment issue and a layout issue. Lots of movement back and forth. Somebody, their personal spaghetti diagram would be pretty twisty, and I saw people bumping into each other these different flows, kind of people smashing into each other. So it makes me wonder, like, I saw at Toyota last week, not perfectly mixed model, but there's one assembly line where you see Camrys and RAV4s, kind of a very one piece flow of not just colors, but body styles. And that's good to see, but they don't have the ideal of building any product on any assembly line. That would be, ultimate flexibility. So it makes me wonder, like, from a Starbucks perspective, that's one job shop back there. Like, at what point do they consider the need for focused factories? Or you think of like multiple production cells in a factory. Here's the cold drink cell. Here's the hot drink cell. Here's the drip coffee cell. And then I don't know where the food, where food would fit into that cell. At some point, maybe the process and the timing and the labor would work out to be kind of a combined cell. But like, to me, it just seemed like just this molecular motion of people bumping into each other, which doesn't seem ideal.
Yeah, and that no, it certainly doesn't seem ideal. It seems like everybody's trained on everything. Everybody tries to pitch in. Everybody tries to get stuff done. You definitely have somebody working the counter. Others more focused on drinks, but no, there's a lot of crossover flow. You can see even a small Starbucks might have 10 people behind the counter just to deal with the volume. Mm-hmm. And I really feel bad when I walk in. I'll walk into one, and there'll be one person working there, and they're clearly not as busy as a regular Starbucks. But I'm almost like, there's no way you can do this with one and not struggle. But if the number of you've got to look at product and process together, which you brought up earlier, is the product proliferation, not just on the drink side, but also the drink side, has gone through the roof. Mm-hmm. And you have to wonder, you don't have to wonder that much what it's done to process. Right. That part's clear. It's you'll read little articles and stuff about how they're caffeine-free drinks. Kids got caffeine at 8 p.m. and their kids are wired, and how many drinks get screwed up by just a little bit. And but I think I don't remember if it's in the article, but it was 170,000 different combinations.
Right.
And even back in 2009, it was 80,000. So do they really need, like, I know everybody likes their particular drink, but would they really leave Starbucks, right? If they cut that complication down by 2/3, perhaps. Right.
Well, there's new products, and then you've got seasonality, where certain drinks come on and off the menu at different times of year. But I went and looked up something about McDonald's, where McDonald's in recent years really kind of slashed the number of items available on their menu. They simplified the menu. They got rid of all-day breakfast. So it's funny, at one point that was really going to bring people into the stores. And the franchisees, maybe they were saying, look, the benefit of that is not worth the kitchen complexity of the challenges of cooking breakfast while you're cooking other food. So the franchisees were actually calling for that. I'm sure not all of them agreed.
Right.
But their cost went down, their profitability is up. Starbucks has had sales growth, but they've taken a hit in profitability, probably because of labor costs and supply costs. That seem to be the two main things, right?
Yeah, and anybody that's ever gone through a SKU rationalization, I'll call it, a SKU rationalization study, has found that there's a lot of SKUs that don't make sense, mm-hmm. right? And so you simplify, and that exercise almost always results in the correct path is SKU simplification. And I'm not going to advocate that that's the right answer, because I haven't studied Starbucks in a way, but I do wonder if, again, an individual worker at a Starbucks can't even advocate for SKU rationalization, because you'd have to cut 170,000 down to 70,000 for it to make sense, right? For it to really make an impact.
Yeah, I don't know at what point a smaller number of drink possibilities makes things easier. But there's, increased variation in milks now, like oat milk probably was not real common in 2009. But yeah, you're right. We don't know. I don't think Starbucks would know. And my question would be, how do you do a small test of change to sort of try to prove out, to your point, Jamie? Like, I'm going to look at their mobile app here and look at some of these, festive flavors drinks here, like sugar cookie almond milk latte. Like, if they eliminated that, they would save maybe the sugar cookie syrup. I looked at this earlier. I didn't really consider buying one, but if they slash that from the menu, that's one less syrup that they have to try to get. Would a customer say, well, fine, I'm going to go get that drink somewhere else? Maybe they couldn't. Maybe they would say, okay, fine, I'll get a caramel brulee latte. At some point you could maybe just kind of do some tests.
Right.
I don't know, but people get irritated though, because it would be like going to a Big Mac, a McDonald's, and not being able to get a Big Mac. Like,
well, yeah, unless
standardization you expect.
Right. It is what you expect, although you still get a Big Mac at McDonald's, right? They didn't cut that from the menu. So they are doing these big experiments. They are doing them more in process. It doesn't appear from the article that they're really looking at the menu, because they're was it called Trier Center?
Kind of like a prototype lab.
It's really not a store, right? It's really a place to work on process, on technology, on, I guess, store layout as well. And so the goal is to experiment a great deal, but it's not a storefront, so they're not doing market tests in there. They're just doing process, technology, and layout tests in this Trier Center.
Yeah, and there's some language there that really was really interesting. I mean, it sounded like this idea of integrated product and process design. There's a quote here that the center began pairing baristas, beverage developers, and engineers to figure out how to carve seconds off the time it takes to prepare coffee drinks, particularly complex cold ones. And there's the layout issue, then there's the equipment issue. So one of the things they were sounded pretty proud of, it was a former GE person actually now working at Starbucks, a portable blender that could be kept near the espresso machines. Well, like, that exists elsewhere in the world. In fact, once random memory here, when I worked at Dell Computer in Austin in like 1999, a friend had a boat, and you get to go out with him and his girlfriend, and a lot of times people would bring beer. Well, I bought a Black & Decker margarita blender that ran off of rechargeable batteries, where you could make a margarita off of battery power, right? And then there's little small bullet blenders. I've got one in my kitchen, right? So is Starbucks being innovative, or it seems like some of that's more or less off the shelf technology.
Off the shelf, but if you're going to replace what's probably many millions of units, it's a big decision, right?
Sure.
So you'd at least test the heck out of it before you were sure, and bought millions of units and trained all the stores, because it would also change. It would change the workflow. Mm-hmm. It would change perhaps the layout, right? Where do you store them? Where do you charge the batteries?
Yeah.
Where do you wash, right? Because you still have the wash that you've got to deal with, and so
just walking for that.
Yeah, it's all the ice, all that other stuff.
But that's where I wonder. I mean, I'm just speculating. It's a thought experiment of, if you had a cold beverage cell, like they have espresso machines, where all the drinks flow through, it seems, the same espresso machines. If you had a focus factory, or a quote unquote cell for making nothing but cold drinks, blended, frozen, or otherwise, you might have its own espresso machine, the ice machine, the syrups, and all the stuff. Like, you have a little bit of a flow, including a sink to wash the blender, and
right.
Then there might be a separate focus factory cell for the hot drinks. Now, would that require more espresso machines? It depends on the volume of the work. I don't know if how feasible that is, but
and of course this comes down to metrics, right? Because you have the speed of delivery, right? So you have the seconds it takes to make a drink, right? That's your efficiency. You have the speed at which you make drinks, which is your customer service, and then you have the employee satisfaction of making the drinks,
right?
which is clearly through the floor, right? And it's through the floor for a bunch of reasons, including the public being a less tolerant public than we've perhaps ever been in all time to our service workers.
Right.
And so that weighs on people. The short staffing makes it worse, and so that goes there as well. But it's been very clear from whether it's unionization efforts or just barista complaints that they're frustrated with their working conditions. And so, at what point is it, hey, simpler, better service, maybe not as efficient, is a good trade-off to make?
When we talk about time, one thing that was interesting in their quotes about the Trier Center, they wanted to speed up the time it took Starbucks to launch new ideas. There's like a time to market speed.
Right.
And then there's the drink delivery speed. So they said they had a goal posted in one of the stores, like now, current day, of 50 seconds time for a drink. The 2009 article talked about a store that was already one of the fastest that was doing a drink in 25 seconds on average, and they were able to take 2 seconds off of that. So it makes me wonder, like, the difference between 2009 and 2022, the product mix is clearly different. Like, I don't think it would be fair to look and say, like, oh, they're half as efficient now because it takes twice as long to make the drinks. It's not apples to apples.
It's not apples to apples, and I don't know if that's a single drink straight through, right? Because if you do observe, you'll see them making multiple drinks at once, which is clearly a recipe for making mistakes and errors, right? And so that, it has that error. And so how are they measuring that? Are they measuring it one drink at a time? They clearly don't seem to be measuring it from order placement, right? It's
order,
not
right. Yeah, I mean, order could be 2 beverages and a sandwich. I mean, I'm sure they're using the word order very specifically, not using the word beverage.
I would imagine, but I also don't think it's from the time you've placed the order to the time you get it. I don't think anybody's getting their stuff in 50 seconds from their order time. So that's got to be from the time they start the order to the time they deliver it. And so there's still, of course, the queue there that is part of the challenge, right? And that's part of getting more flow. And there's more ways to get flow than just knock seconds off an order at a time.
Right. And then, kind of stepping back and thinking of some of the why. The article talked about, there's a quote here, that the stores that were designed a decade ago struggle to meet today's customer demand. That cafes that once averaged 1,200 orders a day are now trying to make 1,500. So that's, there's this, I don't know. I mean, it's hard to tell how long the queue is when, I remember going to a Starbucks in 1999 before going to work at Dell, standing in a long 12-person deep line to buy coffee. You don't see that now, but it's like a virtual queue in the app. You don't have that same visibility. So maybe now the industrial engineer in me is like, oh, maybe fewer people are, quote unquote, balking the queue, as they say. You're not going to walk out without placing the order. Maybe that's good for sales in a way to make that weight hidden. But there's kind of just this increased complexity. There's this drive to do more. There's the shifts to more drive-through orders, and there's these employee complaints that just kind of lead to this pretty compelling case of, if you're trying to fend off unionization, that's a big fight going on right now in a lot of stores. And it sounds like it's not just about pay. It's about working conditions and staffing levels and things that are part of that process design.
Yeah, and that all goes together, right? And so the working conditions, they do talk about the bending, the stretching, the cleaning, all the things that just don't seem to be laid out well. And are you listening to people, and are you fixing the stuff? And again, not everything can be fixed easily. It requires a layout change, a major rethink. And I think that's the key, or a key is, for managers, and I don't mean store managers, I mean leaders all the way up, they've got to spend enough time understanding the problems that people are dealing with, and know, when are you supporting them in problem solving? When are you supporting them as a coach and teaching them problem solving? And when are you listening to their problems saying, I've got that?
Right.
Because again, not every problem that they can solve. If you
Right.
have a policy issue, if you have a strategy issue, if you have a structural issue, you can't go, hey, employee, let me coach you through that. Like you can coach them how to deal with it. You can coach them how to accommodate it, but you can't coach them how to change it because it's well outside their scope. And so that's where leaders have to really understand, when am I coaching problem solving and when am I listening to take some other problem ownership and take it to a different level.
Right. And people who know me or have read my book or blog posts or podcasts know I am the biggest advocate for engaging employees in improvement. At the same time, like I run across this a lot of times in healthcare where I hear people say things that really sound like, well, they're just delegating everything to the frontline staff, that you're empowered, right? And again, like it takes balance and participation. Leaders can't, shirk their responsibility for systemic issues. Like if you're at a hospital, there are some process improvements you can make within the context of your system. But if it's a fundamentally lousy system, the frontline workers can't make those bigger, more systemic changes, at least not without management approval. You think of like, flow in the emergency room and patients being backed up where they can't get admitted into beds. Well, if you start asking why and start looking at the value stream of care, like, well, why can't we get patients from the ER into inpatient beds? Well, because we have patients that we're trying to discharge, but there's not enough capacity in the nursing homes or long-term care. Like you can't ask the frontline ER emergency department professionals to Kaizen their way out of big systemic problems like that.
Yeah, especially when, some of them are between different entities, right? Nursing center owned by a different entity than a hospital, an ambulance service owned by a separate legal entity than the hospital, and
right.
and some of these balances and imbalances that again a 25-year-old nurse can't fix that problem. They can only highlight the hey, I can't meet my standard no matter what I've tried. And you talked about delegate. I like to use the word abdication because
right.
There's often a lean is about frontline worker. We're going to give them ownership of their process, and so to me that's abdication of responsibility, and that's not what lean is.
No, that's why I use the word shirk. I mean, it's kind of a
Right.
similar idea behind it. That your role as a leader changes. You certainly aren't expected to have all the answers as a leader. That doesn't work.
Right.
But neither does the other extreme. And so, I think if you look at the business case for Starbucks making these improvements, a lot of it comes down to things that are a big problem in healthcare of like, employee retention. So this article, the recent one said 1 in 4 US, I assume this was Starbucks baristas, are quitting their job within 90 days. 1 in 4 within 90 days. That's up. It used to be 1 in 10. So the cost of hiring and training and rehiring and retraining and that employee churn, that's a big cost to the business. And that has I'm sure all kinds of spillover effects where if you reduce turnover, you're improving efficiency, you're improving quality, you're improving customer service. There's a lot of benefits from, focusing on customers or focus on employees, not just customers.
Yep.
And trying to fix things. So, there was in the news the other day, different articles, 3-day strike at 100 Starbucks stores involving 1,000 workers. There's a lot of, and it's funny, people say labor unrest. I'm like, well, why you make it sound like a labor problem when really it's just a company problem? You could say it's a labor management problem or a management labor problem.
Yep. They're voicing their concerns, and whether you think it's productive or unproductive doesn't really matter. There's concerns enough to prompt action, and sort of taking this full circle to the point in the headline about Howard Schultz and his third turn. You never know whether it's for show or not, but I think he's seen in a picture in the article sitting down with baristas listening, right?
Yeah, he went. To give him credit, it said, he came back in March and April he went to the quote unquote Gemba. He didn't use that term, but
Right.
yeah, going to the stores to better understand problems and worker desires.
Yeah.
That's great.
So he went out to listen, and whether he hears them properly, of course, do they all speak with one voice? Of course not. And that's why it's so important not to abdicate, because you've got to sift through the noise. You've got to find the gems, the good ideas, the true patterns, the true truth, the true reality of what's going on through the noise. If you talk to 1,000 people, you're not going to hear one thing 1,000 times, and so that's the hard part.
Mm-hmm.
But yeah, that's the hard part. That's why this is hard. Is you've got to go listen, you've got to go observe, got to go validate, and then you've got to have enough insight and intuition to sift through all of that noise to find where the real meaningful change can be made.
Yeah. So there's a lot of opportunity. You can see it when you go and just observe and watch and be a customer. There's, I'm sure, data that Starbucks is privy to that we aren't able to look at. And I'll give them credit that they're trying to make things better. It said here in terms of speed of change, there's another quote in the article. They've told employees the company hopes to have new equipment and designs rolling out in the next 3 years. So I don't know if that means it starts in the next 3 years, or clearly it's going to be a process to go through thousands and thousands of stores. It's more than 10,000 stores, I believe.
Yeah, it's got to be. It's a long time to wait if you're frustrated. So, but sometimes we can all put up with a little pain and suffering, a little inconvenience, whatever you want to call it, if we have confidence that things are going to get better. And so, whether it's this tour, whether it's communication of the strategies, and of course, it's the speed of and effectiveness of those strategies. If they'll give people enough confidence, the baristas in particular, that they do want to stick around and wait for the improvements to come about.
Yeah. I mean, I think the last thing I would have to say about all this is, I do hope Starbucks figures out these challenges. I want the people I am not a daily Starbucks customer, but at least a couple of times a week. And I want the people working there to be happy beyond pay and benefits. And Starbucks pays for online education. And there's a lot of, progressive things that Starbucks has done, and they still have employees who are frustrated and upset. So I hope they're able to get some of these challenges and these problems solved, or at least made better. So people enjoy working there. That'll lead to, for what, a better service, a better experience for me. I don't have any huge customer complaints. Like, the waiting times to me don't sound excessive, especially when I try to, order ahead and make it line up. It's not gaming the system. I guess it's just trying to use the system well. So I don't have huge dissatisfaction. I'm not ordering those super complex drinks for the most part. I like their nitro cold brew coffee, which is they didn't invent that, but that's another product addition to the store that requires new equipment. It takes up some space. It's a matter of hitting the tap and pouring the drink. But I have run into many times where they'll say, well, the equipment's broken. Like, maybe not to the extent of the famous McDonald's soft serve ice cream or flurry machine, whatever that is, like notoriously breaking down. I don't think it doesn't seem as bad. I don't have perfect data, but there are these things that go wrong. I'm sure it causes frustration for customers and employees alike.
Yeah, but I think you can see where the pain is that, to your point, it's a lot of employees, a lot of them, it's for a lot of reasons, good place to work. There's a lot of people that work there that really want to like working there, right? They probably will. There's aspects of it that they love, and they want it to work out. So I think certainly for their sake, I think it's I certainly, I'm not a customer, but I certainly hope they sort some of these challenges out, whatever it takes.
Yeah. So, thank you, Jamie, for kind of talking through this. letting people see a little bit behind the scenes. Like I'd proposed talking about this article a while ago, and Jamie, I'll give you credit, fair enough. You're like, well, we don't really know their business, we don't really know their Gemba. Should we really talk about it? But
especially me.
well, even especially me. I mean, the only inside I have was like back in that day, I did meet somebody who was in the role of a VP of lean thinking at Starbucks.
Mm-hmm.
He left the company in 2011. There was another person in a central lean role who had moved up, the ranks from, barista to management. I talked to him and I got to go see a couple of stores, with them. And at the time they had a different development. This is all just kind of occurring to me now. A different little mini development center where they were working on some process and some equipment issues. So, maybe this is phase 2 for Starbucks, and hopefully they get some other things figured out. But I bet in another 10 years there will be new challenges and new problems. So again, it comes back to this question of capabilities, of designing a good process, designing processes that work with new products, and then there's capabilities around continuous improvement. I would argue you've got to have both. It's not either or.
Got to have both, and you've got to know where on your Pareto chart, relatively speaking, to be working, right? When do we have to go shift the strategy? When do we have to change the structure? And when do we just need to improve the process? And making that decision alone, right? Where's our focus need to be on that spectrum is not an easy one. And if you make it too late, then you can get behind the problems, and that's sometimes a hard spot to get out from under.
Yeah. So you're making me think. I'll make one other comment about visiting David Meyer and Glens Creek Distilling. We were talking about what he does there. We were talking about Toyota, and he was saying, well, TPS and lean. It's problem solving, and he's running his business, it sounds like, as a problem solver. Like, what is the most pressing need? He used that language, which is Taiichi Ono language that I often quote. Right. Start from need, focus on your most pressing needs. Is it a revenue problem that he needs to work on? And if so, what are the causes? Is it a need to develop new products? Is it develop to find better distribution? Like, there are problems that he knows exists in his facility that are nowhere near the most important problem. He's like, well, that's going to wait for another day. And he said an outsider could come in and point out and say, hey, you've got this clear, obvious problem. Why aren't you working on it? And he was like, you don't think I've been thinking about that? Like, right. It's just not the most important problem to be solved. And I think that was a good reminder from David.
No, it's perfect. And that's why he'll point out, like, if you go visit, say you're not going to see perfect 5S, because that's not my most pressing issue, right? Like, mostly like 3 people share the workspace. They kind of know where stuff is. So it's not a pressing issue. Will they work on it? Sure. Yeah. Is it pressing right now? Not compared to other problems. So that's a great wrap up from this week.
Yeah. And then, maybe in 2023, now that I live just 90 minutes away from his distillery, that either I can do an in-person episode with David. Maybe, we can film some video, or maybe stretch goal, you and I could be down there with David. We did one in person this year. Do you have the technical capability for 3 microphones in the same place?
Not yet.
We'd have to upgrade.
We'd have to upgrade.
All right.
We'd have to upgrade, and probably ask him to turn off his his mash units. So some of the equipment's in there quite loud. So we'd have to figure that out. But
yeah, maybe we could try it. All right. So before we wrap up here, and as we go into Christmas and end of year holidays, we'll just kind of end with a question here. Jamie, are there certain gifts that you like to give that are whiskey related?
Yeah, so whiskey gifts are tough because, give whiskey to people. It's like, well, what do they like? What do they have? What do they not like? You don't know. Glasses can be tough because, they can have a closet full of them and they like their particular kind. So ones that have worked both for me and that I give, I do sets of sample pours. That's particularly fun in person. Just, a few different sample pours from the bottles, and take a picture of what I poured out and give them a sample set of stuff they'll probably never, buy off the shelf. That's probably my favorite. Water droppers for those that might not have one is always a nice fun one because nobody's going to have too many of those. That's pretty rare.
Yeah.
And then there's some good books. Like I got a book actually on Pappy Land, I think it's called, as a gift, and then read it. And so I think you have to be careful about those, and some of them can be pretty big and expensive. Some of the coffee table ones, but I think books work pretty well too. So I think it's stay out of the core whiskey and glass category, but
Yeah.
but there's plenty of gifts that you can get.
Yeah. And you mentioned books. One book I need to get back to it because it is in print. It's over 400 pages. This book I'll recommend. It makes a great gift. I've been reading it on Kindle because the text is small and my eyes are bad. It's called Last Call: The Rise and Fall of Prohibition by Daniel Okrent.
Nice.
A little bit of trivia. I recognize that name from a long time ago because he is one of the creators of what used to be called Rotisserie League Baseball, which is now referred to as fantasy baseball.
Right.
But this book is fascinating for anybody who's wondering, like, how in the world did the U.S. ever get into prohibition becoming the law of the land through a constitutional amendment? The book, it's really 3 phases of like what led up to this, then what happened during prohibition, maybe 4 phases. What led to the U.S. stopping that experiment, and then things opening back up again to a quote unquote wet country again. So that book, if someone's interested in history and not just whiskey, Last Call, it's a good book there. But yeah, you're right. Oh, go ahead.
Yeah, it sounds interesting. I'll definitely add it to my list.
Yeah, it's a good book, and usually, it's sometimes the last thing I really need, but I usually end up with a few bottles of whiskey as a Christmas gift, and it's very it's very what was I going to say, low odds that there's going to be a gifted bottle or I open it and say like, oh, I hate that one.
Sure. Yeah.
And usually it's something that I've never had before. Because I'm the type, I do like trying new things, but if you were to give a gift to somebody who says, like, for example, like, man, I love Benchmark bonded bourbon, that's all I ever drink, it's probably it's more likely someone says like, I love Wild Turkey, or I love Knob Creek, and that's all I drink. Well, don't buy them a bottle of something different.
No, don't try to change their palate if they have one. So.
Yeah. So hopefully enough about the person you're gifting the bottle to realize, can you take a flyer, or do you need to buy something that's in their wheelhouse? I can't remember who it was. I was talking to somebody who said like they buy their dad the same bottle every year for his birthday or whatever. And like, okay, that's become a tradition. Like,
nice.
If that's what dad drinks, then go for it. But I was just going to answer the question a little bit differently. I ended up buying wine related gifts for people more often. So wine glasses, similar thing. Like they may have a ton of glasses, but there's sometimes new innovations of different shapes of glass, or realizing inevitably you're going to break some during the year. Yep. If you're a wine drinker, wine glasses can be a good gift. The one thing I wouldn't recommend as a gift, this is preference. I've tried them, and like, to me, whiskey stones are not a great gift. I don't think whiskey stones are a great product. It sounds good, but no.
Mine are probably still on the bottom of my freezer somewhere, but they were a fad. I think they've fallen out of fashion. But yeah, my wine glass collection, actually at this point, it's you break the good ones, but the souvenir ones you get at a wine tasting never break because they're super thick and not that good. So my ratio of good to bad wine glasses is probably out of whack at this point.
Yeah. Well, Jamie, thanks for doing the episode here. I went through and I was recounting the year on my blog. This is our 6th episode together for the year.
Okay.
And you did one recently with Chris, and you'll think back to when we started these out. I think we were trying to figure out, I think I'd proposed monthly. I think you said, well, maybe every 2 months. So, okay, fair. Yeah, there we go. Sometimes we do them monthly. Sometimes there's gaps, but we'll keep doing these. We think about 2023 of the, not just the to-do list, but the stop doing list. Like for me, this podcast is not on the stop doing list.
No, it's too much fun. It's, as we've said, this has always been We don't worry about being overly scripted. We don't worry about being overly on time in terms of when we publish.
Right.
And like I said, it gives us an excuse to get together and talk shop, which is what we've always loved to do anyway. So
Yeah.
so we'll keep pouring a dram and talking lean.
Yeah. So maybe next time, I think maybe a topic is plant tours, like
Yeah.
public plant tours, and the pros and the cons and what you can or can't get out of it. Maybe that's a topic that we could explore.
Sounds like fun.
And then when you mentioned dram, before we go, I finished my cocktail, and again, that was called a Bourbon Flip. A flip, I guess, it's just a category of drink that has egg in it, I believe.
Okay.
Is why it's called that. But as we continued here, I did pour a dram of Port Charlotte heavily peated 10-year Scotch. This is from Bruichladdich in the Isla region, who I got to visit back in August. That was certainly a highlight of the year, and I think I mentioned Bruichladdich before. But to me, this feels like winter because it's heavily peated. Makes me think of fireplace. I tend not to drink these in the summertime.
Yeah, no, that sounds right to me. I think heavily peated, definitely not a outdoor summer drink, for sure. So
yeah. All right. Well, thanks, Jamie. I know we'll cross paths in person again in 2023. We can do another podcast in person. We'll keep doing them this way through Zoom too, I'm sure.
We'll figure that out. Until next time, Merry Christmas and cheers.
Merry Christmas, Happy New Year, Happy Holidays to everybody. Thanks.